we kind of blew through the first half of the information pretty fast. So before I start with environment, start with climate change, is there anything that, lingering questions, something that I blew over too quickly that would like further expansion? Are we good to go?
Good to go.
Good to go.
Good to go. Okay, awesome. So, the reason I'm going into climate change, even though I'm sure most of us have already heard about it in general, is that there are certain aspects and details that I think it's important for us to be all on the same page about before we consider, furthering community building. So, I'll just go with some of the basics first. Work with me.
Promise of coffee.
I always expect technology to
it's so
fail. I
sad.
have an anti-commercial bias. So.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll work on it. All right, well, I'll just go off the little screen now. James Hansen, a former NASA climatologist, called climate change the greatest challenge humanity's ever faced. CO2, greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, we emit it whenever we drive our cars. Without a greenhouse effect, the Earth would be a ball of ice, basically, minus 18 degrees rather than the average of 15 degrees that we get. The safe limit that scientists around the world have put on parts per million of carbon dioxide existing in the atmosphere is 350. So 350 parts of carbon dioxide per million parts in the atmosphere. So before the Industrial Revolution, we had about 280 parts per million. We surpassed that 350 parts per million somewhere in the 1900s, and in the past few years we surpassed a big landmark of 400 parts per million. So that means since the Industrial Revolution, we've increased the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by 43%. Further estimates say if we reach 450 parts per million, we'll, I shouldn't say successfully, we will raise the temperature of the atmosphere by 2 degrees, I think is in line with 450 parts per million. Right now, we've gone to 0.8 degrees Celsius, and that may not sound like a lot when we're talking about summer being 30 degrees at some times and the winter being minus 30 at some times.
You might want to give your reference year. It's 0.8 degrees with reference to what?
What year did we land at 0.8 degrees Celsius of warming?
No, what year is the starting point? Because they always designate a 0 point, right? Climate change goes up and down. So when you're saying we've already had 0.8 degrees Celsius, do you know what year?
General knowledge is just, they roughly just say the Industrial Revolution, which I kind of put around 1750, which is about 250 years before the 21st century. So yeah, in only 250 years, concentration's gone up 43% of carbon dioxide. We've raised the temperature by almost a degree. And even if we stopped all industrial activity tomorrow, meaning no more fossil fuels were burned, no more carbon dioxide was emitted into the atmosphere, we could not stop 1.6 degrees of Celsius warming happening by 2050. So that's very close to the 2 degrees Celsius that the world's nations decided in 2009 we must stay within. We cannot raise the atmosphere by 2 degrees Celsius, otherwise we'll face large-scale economic and climatic consequences. There was a recent article, well, relatively recent, in 2012, Bill McKibben, founder of activist network 350.org, in reference to 350 parts per million, he wrote an article about the 3 crucial numbers of climate change. Number 1, 2 degrees Celsius, as I explained, the 0.8 to the 1.6 we were talking about that we cannot avoid. Number 2 is 565 gigatons. A gigaton is 1 billion tons. Now, when they measure yearly carbon dioxide emissions, they do it in billions of tons. In 2012, there was 33.5 gigatons, roughly, of carbon dioxide emissions. And our budget, our eternal budget of carbon dioxide emissions that we're allowed to spend is 565 gigatons. If we go past 565, we will surpass the 2 degrees Celsius that we need to stay within before we face those catastrophic climatic and economic consequences. And this third number, 2,795 gigatons, or 2.8 trillion tons, what is that? I don't even know how to say trillion tons in gigaton language. But the amount of CO2 contained in proven reserves, and that's on the ledgers of fossil fuel companies. So fossil fuel companies have 2,800 gigatons of knowledge of oil reserves in the earth that they plan on manufacturing and extracting from the earth in order to make their books balance over the next 100 years. So in other words, we have to leave all but 565 gigatons of this in the ground to stay within this number. So 80% of known oil reserves have to stay in the ground. And that 80% represents, to most people's estimate, including inflation and the increase of value of oil reserves over the next 50 years, $10 trillion worth of wealth. So it's basically saying, let's ask the oil companies to give up $10 trillion. And the only way we're going to do that is if we undermine their control of our energy resources. Over the last 30 years, since climate change has become international knowledge, we've seen very little movement towards renewable energies and non-fossil fuel dependent energy systems. So part of what we're going to be dealing with in this course is trying to take back the energy grid for local direction, like Hamburg, Germany has done in the last 5 or 10 years. So climate change, important indicators. 2010 and 2006 were the hottest years on record. I think records we started keeping records on global temperatures annually in the past 200 years. The last 13 years, 12 of those were the hottest years ever recorded. And the vast majority of the heat is going into our oceans, which this graph shows. So the vast majority of heat in this blue, and that's why we're not feeling the effects as much. We're seeing a lot of the heat going to the oceans, and this is causing the Arctic ice to rise. We're seeing 11.5% of Arctic ice diminish every 10 years. By 2050, most scientists estimate at current fossil fuel burning levels, we will not have Arctic ice in summers. It always reforms in winters, but in summers, we're going to expect zero Arctic ice. And when you have those kind of effects, like one thing that the Arctic ice does is reflect that sunlight and that heat back into the atmosphere. If we keep that in there, if we reduce that mirror, we have that black ocean underneath sucking in that heat basically. And that further exacerbates climate change. You have more Arctic ice loss, more heat being sucked in, more Arctic ice loss. And we have a positive feedback loop. And this is why we have to keep within 2 degrees, because if we surpass that, there's a certain level of vagueness, a certain level of ambiguity that we're not sure. If we pass that 2 degrees, maybe there's a positive feedback loop that we can't stop, we can't control any longer. So that's why it's so vital that we stay within that. So bringing climate change from a global perspective to a local perspective is the drought that we suffered through a few years ago. The result was agricultural production fell because harvest yields were much lower, and the industry demand for water increased. And a lot of this is due to a loss in soil organic matter. This is another environmental issue that we'll be getting into a little later. We had a very large rainfall in late fall. Our transportation and infrastructure minister, Robert Vesey, said it was the worst infrastructural damage he'd seen from a weather-related event in his 20 years in public service. And he estimates that the cost for repairs will reach into tens of millions of dollars. So we're seeing, an economic impact that you can't say it was one weather event. We can't say climate change caused this weather event. But the right question to ask is, how did climate change affect this weather event? Are these kind of weather events going to become more common? Are they going to become more frequent, intense? And the answer, if we look around the world, we see Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina. These kind of activities are becoming more common and more intense as the years pass. So we're seeing that we're going to have a lot of infrastructural damage and cost to our economy as a result of climate change and our dependency on fossil fuels. Further sea level rise, we have a lot of coastal infrastructure on PEI, and sea level rise will undermine that there. I wish I had the video from Clive. Adam Fennick, he's a UPEI professor. He's been studying climate change, and he has models that show the sea level rise and the coastal communities that will be lost at current rates of fossil fuel consumption. I'll make sure there's a link to that on the Facebook page that everyone can take a look at. So yeah, hundreds of millions of dollars of development at risk.
What is it called, the one?
Clive? It stands for something like, it's an acronym.
Imaging.
Very
So
extreme.
the neat thing is that you can go in and you can sort of zoom around into whatever area you want and sort of change things around. So you can sort of see what's going to be sort of like now and in the future and what will happen with different levels of water. They've only got like a few places mapped, right, for the information. But yeah, it's a very neat program.
See, we're working with, there are so minutes. I want to leave some time left afterwards for us to talk. So, like I was saying, there are agricultural effects in climate change, and our agricultural system itself is in need of transformation. We see that our industrial practices lead to heavy use of fertilizer, which negatively affects soil and water quality, aquatic systems, and another industry that's important to PEI's economy, fisheries. The pesticide runoff, river sedimentation, anoxic events, and fish kills are some things that have been talked about since the middle of the last century and have been continued to be talked about over a long time. Soil erosion, air pollution, and public health consequences that come with it are all an effect of our agricultural system. This is just explaining runoff and anoxic events. Again, this will be put up on the Facebook page, so if anybody else wants to go through this and the notes that are behind it, feel free, but just for the sake of brevity.
You've all seen it.
I'll see it.
We firsthand.
Yeah.
Looking at the window, you mean, or driving along?
So the important thing is just adaptation. We need to adapt our infrastructure. We need to reconsider construction along shorelines. So the cottages or the condos going up in downtown Charlottetown that are going to be submersed. It's a waste of efforts and precious resources. And adapting our agricultural practices. It's something that us as an island community and within our tighter knit island communities, towns and cities can think about and discuss and act on over time. So complacency is not a policy, inaction is not an option. Further policy implementations that would be focused on these results: reduced fertilizer use, reduced anoxic events, increased soil fertility. When we talk about food and the entire food system later on, these are the things that we're going to be focusing on as our proactive approaches. So yeah, that's basically everything we wanted to go through tonight. Sorry that it was a bit rushed, but if there's any questions.
I do a public service announcement, a couple things. Because tomorrow night at UPI, there's going to be Last Call at the Oasis. So it's a film by the Citizens Alliance PI. It's going to be at 7 o'clock in Robertson Library 235. So hopefully they'll be introduce the film and have a discussion about water and what's happening with it globally. So that's one event that's coming. I know there's lots of other events happening all the time, but.
Perfect. And we should start in the resources as we collect them, share those events on a regular basis. So, there's a lot of very active people on PEI who know what's happening. A lot of them are in this room. There are many others who aren't here, pulling together events to better inform us as a culture.
I think
So how do we access the Facebook
I was just
now?
gonna-
Or there could be another way that.
Everyone, I took a survey last week. Everyone here is on Facebook. Is there anyone who would prefer to be contacted through email as opposed to
There's one
Facebook?
person.
There was 2 people last week that neither of them are here. I couldn't.
Does everybody have their email on this list?
Yes.
No? Okay, so just
So
after.
all you need to do to look at get the page is Cultivating Community Resilience, and the event page for the course should pop up. I'm going to check to make sure that it's still online because the date is technically passed. If it's not, then I'll create a new page with all the same information. And the PowerPoint, our notes, the videos, and other resources we were talking about will be up there. And if anyone else has any questions, comments, or other resources that they want to point to, feel free to post those.
So we go to events and we look for
You can just go to the search
cultivating
bar
communities.
on Facebook and
Let's
put in
say
cultivating,
cultivating community resilience, that's what we need to look for.
cultivating
Search that.
community resilience. Yes.
I was just gonna suggest you make it a group rather than an event, and then it can just be ongoing, like.
Okay.
Yeah.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah, I'll go over
Yeah.
the events group anyway then.
Yeah.
If you make it an event that lasts 8 weeks, I will have to delete my calendar every week.
Yeah.
But it's an ongoing group, so I think there's possibility that other people want to use resources or find a way of even figuring ways that we can use that in the future. So a group would be good, I think.
Yeah.
We want to give
Yeah.
you an opportunity just to chat with your neighbors, to kind of process some of what you heard, with a few guiding questions. But just to say that we unloaded like a whole lot of problems and challenges and issues, looking at a lot of things locally. There are solutions happening. And there's a lot of things currently happening that you are aware about, not aware about. There are people who give a damn and are getting together. You know, 2-day workshop on soils, 70 producers in there, not just your usual suspects. You know, potato farmers and others who want to have a business into the future. So, as guiding questions, you know, break into groups of 4, whatever might feel good for you guys. And what were we looking to get out of you? Basically, what is, you know, where do you feel you have challenges in your own life? And more importantly, where do you want to put your energy? What are some things that you're thinking of that, of these challenges you want to focus your energy on beyond your own independent well-being?
And feel free to use the curriculum if you have it with you as well.
We have those papers from last time where people started to put up questions about the topics that are gonna come up in the
Yes.
next 8 weeks. I'll put those back up on the wall, because in those little conversations, there may be something like, I really want us to talk about whatever,
Yeah.
when that topic comes up.
Yeah, or I want to know about, like, what didn't we cover in this class that you want to know more about? Or where, you know, where's your head, heart, energy at in terms of throwing your energy into solutions? Because, you know, there's a lot to process here, and it's good to meet in groups to like cover this stuff and talk amongst yourselves, if that's where you prefer to put your energy. You know, process this information as you might.
And I'm gonna shut this off because it's going into group work.